this talk today is just wonderful because since March, I know we've all been spending a lot more time in virtual meetings and conferences and happy hours and all kinds of other online events. And if you're anything like me, you are about ready to up your game in this area and try to find new tools and new ways to make them even better. So we'd really like to thank James Ellsmoor, class of 2016, for his willingness to be here with us today and share his best ideas for planning and executing amazing virtual events. And we thank you, James, for being here to help us up our game.
Thanks, Megan, for having me. This is fun. It's great to see everyone's faces. Not sure if everyone at home knows, you have two options that you can watch this in. You can see speaker view, or the other one is gallery view. So you have everyone up in front of you. So I'm keeping it on gallery view so it looks like I have a real audience. So I know that you've probably had so many emails over the last few weeks inviting you to webinars, and a lot of those have probably been great, others not so much. So I'll try and make this a bit fun and interactive. Yesterday I sat through a 2-hour-long webinar that just felt like it went on and on and on and on with very little interaction. We'll just I'll give a quick intro to me and a few little points, and then we'll try and open it up in questions and have discussions and share some ideas. So I kind of got thrown into this, I guess I must have had a crystal ball last year, because last year I started an online summit called the Virtual Island Summit, not realizing the position that we'd be in this year, but really because I saw the value of virtual events to connect people and to bring people together. And I think, even just discussing with the Morehead-Cain Foundation staff before this, they've seen actually by doing these events virtually, the benefits. And it's not to say that I'm sure they'll go back eventually to having in-person events at the foundation as well, but maybe keeping on doing more of these virtual events to engage alumni and having all of us joining from all over the world. So my name is James Ellsmoor. I graduated in 2016. I'm from the UK, which is now where I'm back. The background is just wishful thinking. But I started my company, Island Innovation, a couple of years after graduating. It's about 3 years ago now. And I was fortunate enough in my last summer, my research summer with Morehead-Cain, after I did my semester abroad in New Zealand and took Pacific Island Studies classes, to then do a research project where I went to Fiji and Samoa and Tuvalu, and also a discovery fund to another island called Niue. And it became a little bit of a running joke at the foundation that I was always trying to apply for another discovery fund grant to go to a different tropical island. But I can assure you, Megan, even though you maybe didn't believe me at the time, it's been very valuable, and the island experience is very much being put into practice. I also when I was back in North Carolina, I was also doing some more work in the Caribbean. And then after graduation, I actually did my master's in island studies at the University of the Highlands and Islands in the far north of Scotland. And what was really interesting to me was seeing the commonalities from these really different islands. I mean, Samoa and Jamaica and Orkney and Shetland and Iceland are obviously very different in many ways. But the same kind of discussions came up all the time, whether it was why our electricity is so expensive, which is a theme on many islands. Jamaicans pay 4 or 5 times more than people pay in North Carolina for electricity. What to do with waste and waste management when you don't have a lot of land area to dispose of something. Sustainable fisheries, trying to import food and the dependence on imported food. So a lot of these different areas of sustainable development, and also government services. How do you provide government services on somewhere that was perhaps has a really small population? And so for me, the idea of the Virtual Island Summit came about just by being fortunate enough, and a lot of that through the Morehead-Cain, to have been traveled to all these different islands and see all these commonalities. And especially after I came back to the UK and studied in Scotland, which, being from further south and not having spent much time was really eye-opening for me. And so I came across the idea of hosting a summit, really just to bring people together from these very, very geographically dispersed places, to have useful conversations and to share ideas and information. And so you know, we would have, say, a panel on electric vehicles and have a speaker from Fiji, Barbados, Iceland, and Mauritius all in the same room. Now, if you wanted to do that in an in-person event, you need a big budget to fly all those people. And it also seems a bit redundant to have a discussion on climate change where you're flying hundreds of people in from all over the world. So not to say that, you know, physical events are not valuable, but this was, I think, the power of virtual events, which obviously is being brought to light even more now. Just last week, we hosted a webinar about the future of islands after COVID-19, particularly with the tourism industry, where a lot of these islands are facing tourism problems. And we had the Minister of Economy from Greenland, a representative from Anguilla in the Caribbean, the head of tourism in the Maldives, and a business representative from the Canary Islands. You know, 4 very different places when you think about Greenland and the Maldives, but again, there was this commonality threading them all together. And by having a virtual event, we had 700 people in that webinar, and all of them were able to share their own experiences, etc., in the chat. So the Virtual Island Summit was September last year, and we'll be doing another summit again September this year. Obviously had all this planned before knowing what was happening with the pandemic and lockdown, and recently have become quite popular with other people reaching out and wanting ideas on how to run their own virtual events. So that's why I started running kind of some extra classes and webinars just on skills of how to run virtual events. And I'm not going to go into lots and lots of details with that now, but I'll just kind of run through 3 main points that I think for me are the value of why these virtual events will become or will stay in vogue, and really continue after the pandemic and lockdown starts to disappear. I'm just going to quickly share a slide. So my first, don't worry, I don't have too many slides, just the one, actually 2. But the first one is inclusivity. So the idea that actually, I think virtual events are a lot more inclusive. I mean, the first one being kind of obvious, just the price of going somewhere. If you have to travel halfway across the world or even halfway across the state to attend an event, you're immediately cutting people out who might want to attend but don't have the resources to do that. But also inclusivity on other levels. For example, I was talking recently with the Water Institute at UNC about their event that they're planning on doing, and they have a lot of people coming from Latin America and Africa that require visas to visit the US and often get denied visas at the last minute and cannot come to this event. Inclusivity in the sense, and it might be a single parent who's got kids to look after and can't take the work, can't take time off to travel for the day and come to an event. So there's all these different levels, disabilities as well, all these different levels that I think that virtual events open up and become more inclusive. And for me, I was lucky enough to travel to the UN climate conferences and several other of these large events, and I'd always see the same people talking and the same attendees all the time. And the grassroots group, let's say in Barbados, that is planting trees to make their community better, they don't have the resources to go to this event. So how can we leverage all this information and leverage this really good and useful content, in this case about the Sustainable Development Goals, and help communities apply that and give them access? So the reason I have this map up is, hopefully this is a new one for you. Tristan da Cunha is an island where that red dot is, too small to be on the map. A population of 500 people. The only way to get there is every 3 months, a cargo ship leaves Cape Town, and there's no airport. So the only way to get there, 500 people living out there. There's a whole background of the story that's fascinating. If you Google it, I can type the name in the chat afterwards. But the point is that we had a speaker join us from Tristan da Cunha at our conference. The head of tourism for the island, which you can imagine being a difficult job given the situation, did a presentation about life on the island and shared that story. And their internet, as you can imagine, is not very good. So she was able to join over a phone line, and I was sharing slides, and we shared pictures of the islands and had a really fantastic discussion. And so it's maybe an extreme example, but just to give you an idea of how you can open this up to other people and invite people who, you know, would be almost impossible to have at a physical event. The second point is around, for me, I think a lot of people get really focused on the tech side when they're talking about virtual events. And obviously it's important to have good technology and to know the technology you're using. But actually, I think that running a successful event is far more about psychology and communication, and putting yourselves in the shoes of your attendees. So I've had a lot of people talking about running physical events, or who've previously had physical events, and they've just tried to shove the agenda that they had last year into a virtual format that clearly didn't work. I mean, we've got to be real. Even if someone has attended your event for the last 10 years, they're probably not going to sit for 3 days, 8 hours a day in front of a computer screen. That might sound obvious when I say it like that, but often you don't think of it like that when you're putting together an agenda. So just kind of rethinking how you put together a format for a virtual event on that communication or psychology level, and making it accessible. And even little things, like I've seen a lot of people have put together fantastic events technically, but have failed at the last hurdle because they've not signposted well the link that people have to click in to get there. And so a little thing like that, by not making it really clear in the email and the time, and reminding people, you've got to find this balance of too little emails and too many emails. And I found whichever I do, I always get complaints of either not having enough or having too many, and you have to accept that because people think differently as well. So I think an important part of that is also acknowledging that everyone thinks differently. Some people might save the link in their calendar a month in advance, but other people might decide to join 5 minutes before because they got your reminder email. So yeah, I think that's a big point, is the communication and the psychology element. And then the third one is, I think a lot of us, we go to events because we really want to network with people and we want to meet people. Not always, but often for me, I find that the panels are the secondary discussion. I'm there because I want to share with people and know who else is doing things. And so I actually think you can create, if you do it well, you can create an even better networking experience and a better engagement online. And so a good example will be, for example, I'll encourage you all to drop your questions in the chat. And we'll go through some of those questions. And what we can avoid here, or what we can make sure we do, is try and answer as many of those questions as possible. By having all that, we can have a much better idea of what questions are out there. And so instead of randomly picking someone from the audience and hoping it's a question that applies to everyone and not some very niche issue that they'll grab the microphone and go on for 5 minutes about, we can make it a much more open experience. And actually, I think that's one silly example, but we can make the experience much more engaging. And there's some really exciting platforms coming out. This is my last point, and then we'll go into questions, so feel free to drop them in the chat, and Megan will field them for me. But there's some really exciting platforms coming out that are allowing, I think, that will overtake Zoom by miles, just to create a much more engaging experience, allow people to interact. One of my favorites is called Remo, R-E-M-O. Would really encourage you to check that out, where you go into a room, you sit at a table, you chat with the other people. So Megan, you might want to explore doing that for one of these summits, for one of these events, for example, to allow alumni to chat with each other before and after, and really create that experience, which is a little bit more difficult in Zoom. And there's another one which I don't think is ready yet, called Verbella, which is basically, if any of you remember The Sims, a computer, you have a physical character that walks around a room, and you can hear on your headset people within 2 meters of you, and recreate that kind of realistic experience. So I think in the last 3 months, because there's been a huge demand for it, the technology has boomed. And I think over the next few months and over the next couple of years, we'll probably go to a whole nother level. So trying to kind of see all these new platforms and new ideas are coming out is really exciting. So I'll leave it there in terms of presentation. I think the Q&A and hearing from all of you, and feel free to share an experience, will be much more interesting. Just to share 2 links with you quickly. The second one, the one below, is the virtualislandsummit.com. So I'd encourage you, it's free. Feel free to go and register for that if you'd like to join. And the top one, I realize that's a horrible link to try and type in, so I'll drop it into the chat. But if you just go to islandinnovation.co, I've got like a free 1-hour video, which basically goes into more detail about some of the things I said if you're interested in exploring. But I'll put both of those links in the chat as well. So thanks. Back to you, Megan.
Right, James, awesome. I'm getting excited. I wanted to ask, people are very interested in the 2. I think you said the first one was Remo, R-E-M-O, is that right?
Yeah, let me just type that in. So
yeah,
if you just Google this, R-E-M-O, that's
R-E-M-O.
a really, that's blew my mind, this new one that's come out.
That's so great. And the other one was?
Verbella, which, to be honest, I wouldn't recommend.
Okay.
I don't think it's there yet, but worth checking out just to see where things are going. And maybe by next year, they'll have improved it to the point where it would be ready to use. That's the one where you have a Sims like character walking.
Okay, yeah, Remo sounds really promising. I'm excited about that. That's great. Yeah, and so as James said, you can either unmute yourself and jump in with a question. Happy for you to do that. If you don't mind saying your name and maybe class year, where you're calling in from. It's always fun to hear where people are from. If you, as I joked an earlier week, if there's somebody who hasn't used Zoom, I don't know where you've been, but you can hover at the bottom and see the chat, and you can type in. Jim, I see you've got a question, so I'd love for you to get going. Thank you.
Thank you for the education, because we've all been participating in a lot of Zoom conferences, but I'm interested in your entrepreneurial story. You're a pretty young guy, at least by my standards, and you out on your own, presumably out on the end of a limb from time to time. So can you give us a little bit of your background on that, why you made the leap?
Well, I guess it wasn't really a leap because I never really had a proper job. So I came out of uni. And to be honest, I think, again, having the Morehead-Cain experience where I didn't have any debt, didn't have to worry about things, allowed me to take a lot of gambles in that sense. I felt more comfortable because I didn't have to have anything hanging over my head to worry about. I was able to come straight out of university. I was running an NGO that I started during university, and kept going. And to be honest, I'm still involved with that, but I got a bit fed up of the NGO world and things being slow and not being able to get things moving. So I stayed involved with that, and we're still pushing on projects. We actually, so that's called Solar Head of State. We did projects with governments to do solar installations on government buildings. And as a side note, we just last week got notification from the UN of a project that we're doing, which will be with 11 countries in the Pacific to install solar and solar energy on government buildings in those countries. It's a whole, my other side, but obviously related with the islands. So I started with that, and then I gradually just did projects. I guess the click moment for me was when I was actually visiting friends in Chapel Hill, and someone I had worked with previously who lived in Durham, but we hadn't really met in person, offered me a job just for a day a week working for him for like $20 an hour or something, like very, very basic stuff. And then I was like, oh, I can actually charge for what I'm doing. I know I always struggled to make that leap of doing things and then charging for doing things. And so that was my maybe a simple thing, but for me, that was a click moment that allowed me to kind of transition. And from that, I gradually built up the consultancy. So as well as running virtual events, we do consultations for people to help them do virtual events. That's already come in, as you can imagine, in the last few months. Previously, it was really communications projects. So anything from building websites, social media strategy, helping companies thinking about all different angles around communication, and it's still fairly vague. And now I've got kind of a range of clients in various different countries that I'm working on projects for, and also a team. My team's currently 6 people, so I've got six, well, including myself, 6 people, and we were all virtual for the whole time. So I've actually not met half of my employees in person because we've just worked online. So I have people in the UK, in the US, Jamaica, Venezuela, and Ghana. So we have a really international team as well.
James, we have a question from Jane Summers Kelly. She wants to know about, could you give 1 or 2 specific examples of how you help people reach out and network during the webinar, as people like to talk, breakout rooms, that kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. So I think the difficulty there, obviously it depends on what platform you're using. That's why I would say, honestly, this new platform, Remo, I wish I was getting paid to promote them because I'm telling everyone how great they are all the time, but I think it's going to blow Zoom out of the water. So using kind of platforms like that, within a webinar or within say a Zoom webinar like this, there are ways you can do it, but it can be a bit difficult. So obviously asking people in the chat. So one thing I always do at the start is of a webinar is ask everyone to type in maybe 1 sentence about themselves in the chat, just to kind of get people going and get people comfortable. Obviously then using the Q&A, and we haven't got it in this one because it's a smaller group, but with a larger group, you can have both a chat and a Q&A. And so encouraging people to kind of use the chat for conversation and then submit questions and with the Q&A. And using polls, again, I always like to do a poll at the start, especially if I have larger groups than this, just to find out, because my webinars tend to be very international, so find out where people are coming from, what sectors or industries they represent, those kinds of questions as well. So you can do some things within Zoom. I think other platforms, there's another one called Lunchpool, something like that, which is very similar to Remo as well. And then if you've got more like an event as opposed to a standalone webinar, if you have a whole event, which is like, say, several days long or multiple webinars, you can have an app like Pathable or Attendify or Hoover, and I'll write those names in the chat as well, that can create more of a conference networking experience that people can interact over, that can host your agenda, and that you can add activities in as well.
Great, thanks, James. That's awesome. Janora McDuffie has to give her first keynote talk by Zoom, but her magic has always been in person. She says she's super nervous. What are some tools and techniques, do's and don'ts, that make an effective Zoom speaker?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good one. I think it's good that you've recognized it is a different skill set, because often people fail to recognize that. One thing is some very little things like looking into the camera. Like now I'm looking into the camera. The temptation is to look at Megan when I'm talking, but you can see the difference actually looking into the camera. I try obviously not to stare into the camera the whole time, because it's nice to look at your faces, but a little thing like that can make a big difference. Another thing would be kind of using some of those tools that I just mentioned as engagement, just to try and engage your audience, and don't just talk at people. So having this kind of Q&A or having people contribute is much better than just kind of talking at people for a whole hour, because I think you can sometimes get away with that when you're at an in-person event, particularly if you've got a stage presence. But on a virtual event, people are going to get distracted by the dog or the baby or all the other things that are at the back of their head that they have to do.
Can I follow up with that, if that's okay?
Absolutely.
Hi, James. Hi, Megan. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Janora.
So how important is my setup? Because I see you've got the very cool earphones and speaker all in one. How important is the equipment, and do I need to invest a lot in it?
So I'm only wearing these because it makes me look more professional. It doesn't really make, I don't think it makes the sound that much better when I've done without them. There was a lot of noise happening around here earlier, so it probably does help with that. One thing that I've just noticed now is I think you're on a phone or an iPad, so I can see it moving around a little bit. So you'd obviously want to have something that was set up in one place. Not that it matters now, but obviously just saying that. And actually, if everyone feel free to try this. This is really easy to do. If you click in the bottom left next to stop video, there's a little arrow, and you can see choose virtual background. And on that, you can travel around and do something. So I want everyone to try and do that if you can see it. I'm gonna stay in the Arctic for a little while instead, even though it's off-brand. If people found where to
create your own.
Yeah, you can create your own. It looks like some other people. For some people, it doesn't recognize them. I'm lucky that it recognizes me and it works without a green screen. I can see for some people, it kind of butchers their face a little bit and doesn't work as much. I had one person that I was Skyping that tried to do Zooming, and they tried to do a virtual background, and it just completely beheaded them. And you could just see their shoulders and not their head at all. So you might want to try it before you jump into your setup. Does that answer your question, Janora?
It does. And finally, going back to Zoom, since my talk is going to be specifically on Zoom, what do you think about polls or some of the other things within tools within Zoom? And my audience is also going to be pretty large. What's too big for a breakout room type session, for example?
How big's pretty large?
250.
250, yeah. So that's quite. So the problem that you have when you get kind of over 200 is that the chat just gets so busy that it's difficult to follow it. And so if someone types in a comment, for example, someone might try and reply, but in the meantime, there are 3 other messages. And I think that for me is one of the big downsides of Zoom, that you can't have a more organized chat and reply to people and things like that. So more just to be aware of that. Definitely separating the chat and the Q&A. They're 2 different functions, but often they get merged together. And you have to actually enable them. So you can see on this call, Q&A is not enabled, which is fine because it's a smaller group, but make sure they're enabled in your Zoom settings. And encourage people, say, I'm only going to answer your question if you put it in the Q&A, because then that means you don't have to start trawling through the chat and trying to see things like that. And definitely using polls, even if it's just at the start, like a very simple intro poll, whatever's relevant to your organization, to your audience. You know, what country are you from, what state are you from, what sector do you work in, like a very broad question like that. And then later on, you might want to use more specific ones that relate to your talk. And I'd also think of the polls not only as a way to kind of warm up your audience and allow them to contribute, but also as useful information for you. If you see that 90% of your audience is in North Carolina, then that might affect how and what information you put forward, as opposed to, say, 90% of your audience being in another country or whatever.
And when you do a poll, can you do it on the fly, or is that something that has to be preset and
preset? You got to set it up in advance.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you, James.
No worries.
Good luck, Janora. Good luck with your talk.
Yeah, let us know how it goes.
I'm sure it'll be great. It'll be awesome. Matt Tiedemann has a question. You want to ask it, Matt, since you're in outer space?
Come on, Matt. You can come on.
Sure.
Come on, chat.
Yeah. No, a big question I have, a big thing I struggle with in Zoom is any latency you get with the internet connection. I mean, even a slight little bit among native speakers, I find is very disruptive to kind of the natural flow of conversation. So what advice do you have about how to deal with that, particularly when you have a lot of people whose native tongues are different?
Yeah, I mean, there's no foolproof answer of how to do that. I mean, there's a couple of different things you can do. We actually had a group last week. We had a request from a deaf group that wanted to attend, and so we had the entire event subtitled. That was really hard because the people who were doing that, we actually had three different people, each doing it for 30 minutes, and they were subtitling it. So it could be something to consider also for your non-native speakers, but it's really draining to do that. You can imagine if you're trying to type as fast as I'm talking now live, then and you're not trained to do that, you might want to actually pay a professional to do that instead. The other thing that Zoom actually has built in, which most people don't know, is this doesn't really answer your question, but you just reminded me of it. You can actually do live translation. So we're doing a panel at our next event in French, and there'll be live simultaneous translation into English. And what that will look like as an attendee, at the bottom of your screen, you'll just simply have a drop-down menu, and you can choose English, French, and you can do up to 10 languages at a time. So we're trying to do more. We're trying to do several sessions in French, Spanish, and Mandarin moving forward.
Wow, challenging. Kevin Massey has a question. He is a singer, musician. He says, how do you solve the problem of two sound sources coming from the same quote unquote room? In my case, it would be doing a virtual concert where I'm singing, but also need music for accompaniment coming from another speaker. In others, maybe creating a sound atmosphere while you're speaking. It seems the sound settings filter out one or the other most of the time. It's hard to get a balance.
I think we've probably all seen these recordings of like a choir with 10 different people all singing, thinking, wow, that sounds so good. And they make it seem like you can just do that. If we all tried to sing, even if, I mean, I'm not going to sing, but even if we were all professional singers now, it would not sound like we were a choir in person. You know, I think often it's misleading because you see these recordings and you think, oh, great, we can do that. But they've had heavy sound engineering behind it. And to be honest, that's a bit out of my expertise, having that level of sound engineering needed. I haven't seen, we did a couple of weeks ago, I did a virtual open mic, and that was just a single sound source most of the time with a single microphone. And it was such a shame because we had some really amazing speakers, some really amazing performers coming in that I've heard perform in person, and a lot of them just didn't quite work over the Zoom sound. So I'd almost be tempted to pre-record things and play them. I know that's not a great answer. And I'm sure there are some better softwares out there. Someone just mentioned Acapella. I've not used that, but someone just mentioned it in the chat. So yeah, sorry, it's not the best answer for that one. It's a tricky one with music.
Gare McCullough has a couple of questions. Gare, do you want to ask them or do you want me to?
Oh, that's okay. I'll ask. Hi, James. Thanks for being with us. I am one of those who is trying to recreate college courses for students online, and don't want to just sort of jerry-rig what was done like we did last semester, just trying to limp through to the finish line. One thing we miss a lot is the ability to build community within classes, and I wonder what tips you have for ways to do that virtually.
So I actually did, again, before all this happened, I did my whole master's online. The University of the Highlands and Islands, where I studied, was a specialist institution, or is a specialist institution that was established to provide education in the northern half of Scotland, because before people had to leave and come to the cities to study. And so they have 11 campuses that people could either go to specific rooms to join in or not. In my case, I was studying and I was actually working in the Caribbean, making all my Scottish friends very jealous with having a real background. And so these were very small classes. So we had 5 or 6 people, up to 12 or 15, depending on the class. And the professors, because that was kind of what they did, that was the normal for them, they were very good at kind of leveraging that. So every week, one of us would have to give a presentation. And that was kind of how they would open it. The other thing that I think they leveraged really well was guest speakers, having way more guest speakers than you would normally have on a normal college course. So every week, in this case, this is probably an extreme example, and not that you do that, but in our case, every week we would have a presenter join from a different island that was related to our to the lecturer, and he would bring them in and they would do that presentation. So for us, I think that was a really amazing aspect. I think the breakout rooms feature, if you've not used breakout rooms on Zoom, it's a really simple thing to do. So we have a group, for our summit, we have a group of 150 ambassadors. And once a month, we have them on a Zoom call. I do a short 15-minute presentation. Then I put them out into breakout rooms, into groups of 3 to 5. And they go and talk, and I give them a prompt. I think if you don't give them a prompt, and especially if they don't know each other before, can be really awkward. So giving them some kind of prompt or guidance, and then bring them back again. Maybe I'll ask them to type in the chat, and I'll summarize what's been done, and then put them out. So I think those breakout rooms are good, and even exploring that other platform that I mentioned before as similar to breakout rooms, Remo, could be an interesting one for you.
Great. And Gare also had wanted to know about using Zoom meeting or webinar. Did we address that? I think, because if you go over a certain number of people.
That was really just a comment to
just curious.
I think that she needs to know whether she's going to be a webinar or a meeting, because there are different licenses and capabilities and levels of chaos.
Right.
Yeah, definitely makes a big difference.
And we have found that, you can up your number in just a regular Zoom meeting pretty high. So if you don't need the bells and whistles of webinar, you're fine to just keep
and
that.
Zoom meetings is like $15 a month compared to upwards of $100 for a webinar. So
exactly.
It's nice to see everyone's faces. If we were in the webinar mode, it would just be me and Megan and a load of kind of blank. We wouldn't be able to see anyone and just see through the chat. So it's nice to see everyone.
No fun. Virginia has a question. She wanted to know, how does your advice change more for one-way interactions where the point isn't networking, but something like knowledge dissemination or training instead?
Yeah, I would say rethink the approach in a way. That sitting there and listening to someone for 2 hours, 3 hours is really, really difficult. It's way more difficult than you do. So obviously there are some cases where you have to do that and you don't have an option and it makes sense to do that, but either breaking it up into shorter manageable chunks or just trying to make it as interactive as possible. For me, and I don't really know exactly what type of event it is, so this is maybe a bit general, but one of the things that I really don't like is when I go to a webinar and it might as well be a YouTube video and there's no interaction. And I'm just like, I've scheduled, to be there at 11 o'clock, whereas actually I could have been doing something else at that time and watched it in the evening. I really hate that when it's just kind of, there's no interaction at all. But obviously, depending on the context, sometimes you need to have that type of thing. And I would just say breaking it up. Sometimes, like for a short session like this, it's okay. But I also think sometimes it can be more draining having your video on, especially if you're an audience member. Like for 45 minutes, it's okay. But if you're there for 3 hours and you're expected to have your video on and you've got to be sitting there upright, looking engaged, it can be a bit draining. So thinking about just I guess putting yourself in the shoes of the attendees and saying what is it realistic, and what will maximize the knowledge retention, and how can you maybe change it from how you would do things normally.
Joe McGuire has a question. Do you want to ask that, Joe? Or do you want me to?
No, I'll be glad to ask it. Hey, James. How do you, when you're hosting, how do you add slides, photos, charts like you did today?
So it depends a lot on the platform that you're using. In this case, Zoom, you can simply share your screen. So you would have, in my case, I normally would just use a PowerPoint presentation, and it won't be enabled for you all right now. You have to, the host has to enable it to allow that person to share their screen. But if the host enables it, you would then have a little green button at the bottom of your screen. It just says share screen, and you share that PowerPoint in. And you can do, it's not just a PowerPoint, you could share potentially a website if you want to talk through a website. You can share videos as well. They're normally pretty glitchy, but you can also share things like that. Does that answer your question, Joseph? Yeah, okay.
Tom Morris has a question for you.
I'm unmuted. I'm unmuted?
Yeah,
all right, good. I did it. All right. Here's my question. Suppose I have like 5 or 10 or 20 people. There are 25 on my screen right now. And suppose I wanted to talk to them about something that I knew they'd have questions about or comments about. And we didn't want to do it as a chat function, because there's kind of a thing that if you're reading the chat, you're kind of catching a little bit of what the speaker is saying or what somebody's saying, but you're not 100% anywhere, right? If too much is going on at once. So suppose everybody on the screen right now was unmuted. Suppose we all had our microphones on. And suppose people wanted to say things or interrupt me or interrupt you, or we should do it as an experiment, actually. Everybody turn on your microphones. Let's all interrupt James.
We'll have complete chaos.
Yeah, that's my question. Have you done that? And what is the limit for the possibility of that? How do you prevent chaos? Is there some version of that where chaos is held barely at bay, is my question.
So I think the way that Megan is chairing this right now is really helpful, because people have the option to raise their hand, either wave, put in the chat, or you can virtually raise your hand if you click on participants as an option there. So you get called to be, you get put on a list to be called on. If instead Megan had said, does anyone have any questions? And everyone had tried to speak at once, then we would have just got complete chaos. Because
what happens actually auditorially, audio, with respect to the audio, what happens?
So Zoom will only really allow one voice coming through at a time, easily. And if you have 2 or 3 people trying to talk, it just gets very difficult to hear or follow that. I mean, even more so than if it was 3 people trying to talk over each other in a room. The technology would be even more difficult to follow than that. And so what can be quite awkward is, especially when you have even a very small delay, 2 people try and talk, then there's a really awkward 4-second pause, then they both try and talk again. And then you before you know it, you've wasted half a minute because of just those awkwardness. So trying to share it, I actually think moderation for any of the Zoom webinars that I've run, moderating it has been the number one success or fail thing, having a good moderator. And someone who's a good moderator at an in-person event is not necessarily a good moderator on a Zoom event.
Interesting.
Because so it's about having a good flow and trying to have someone manage it. If you do want a situation where it's more people talking to each other, in that situation, you use the breakout room. So actually we could click a button here and put you all into little sessions with 3 or 4 people. You could each have a chat with each other and then come back. That will be a lot more successful.
Oh, okay, that's good. That's good to know. I mean, when you mentioned moderation, I thought we were going to be talking Aristotle all of a sudden, but probably he'd do it the same way too. Thanks a lot. That was very informative.
Thanks, Tom.
We had a couple people raise their hand. I'm not sure whether they were testing the feature or whether whether Gare or Sandy actually had a question or whether they were just playing with the hand raise. So chime in if either of you really have a question.
I just wanted to show Tom what it looked like on the screen when someone had his hand up.
Very good.
So you see on my picture the little hand.
It's possible only the hosts can see it. That's possible too. So So yeah, good. So we have another question from Jessica Green. Jessica says, can you lecture effectually and moderate at the same time?
Good question, Jessica. I think it depends, is my best answer. Normally, when I'm running a larger webinar, I would be behind the scenes as tech support, and the moderator is just in charge of that conversation flow. So I will be doing all the technical stuff behind the scenes. I've done it in the past where I'm doing both, but I think part of that is also that I'm very used to doing that, so it's maybe a little bit easier. But often, especially if you have kind of more than, say, 50 people, trying to look in the chat, look at the participants, do all these other things is really, it can be quite difficult. And I will say, luckily Zoom has updated its features now, but I was involved in I had a Zoom bombing incident. Luckily it wasn't an event that I was organized, where someone gate crashed the meeting, 8 people popped up that weren't meant to be there. Then someone started live streaming pornography right into the middle of this meeting full of, that was meant to be kind of a professional discussion. And that was pretty awkward and difficult, and the host took a while to kick them out and get them out. And yeah, that was a pretty dramatic experience. Luckily, Zoom has now updated its software and made that a lot more difficult. So hopefully it doesn't happen again. But there was about 2 or 3 weeks where several people I know the exact same thing happened to, and it just became a big epidemic and that. So yeah, that shouldn't happen anymore. But I did, for example, last week I had to kick someone out because they were continually spamming the chat and typing advertisements about their business over and over again. And so little things like that, or I've never had to deal with it, but you can imagine a situation with someone potentially saying something abusive in the chat, or that if we had a meeting like this and there were people who kept trying to talk and interrupt, you'd need someone to kind of mute that person and even kick them out if it came to that. So yeah, having someone who's in charge of the moderation and someone who's behind the scenes doing the tech side of things, I think is really important for a larger event.
Great. Jessica says that is very helpful. Thank you very much. Amit Gupta is wondering if Zoom is your preferred platform for most virtual meetings, or do you have experience with Google Meetings, Cisco WebEx, BlueJeans, etc.? And if you have any pros and cons to share about the different platforms.
Yeah, so Zoom, I think if you'd have asked me that 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I would have said absolutely Zoom. But as you've heard, Remo is my new favorite one, as I've mentioned before, and there are several others. Again, I think it depends on the situation that you're using. If you do want to do something where your attendees can talk to each other and network, which you may not want to do, then a platform like Remo is much better. So it depends really on the goals of your event, which platform. I like Zoom also. It's kind of like the Google thing. People are familiar with it, and so people kind of go to it as a number one. And so suddenly a new software like Big Marker or BlueJeans, which is very similar to Zoom, if someone has to download a new software to use that, you're kind of creating an extra barrier for them joining. So it's another reason I like Zoom. It's just because it's so widespread. I don't think it's perfect. There's a lot of things that are to be desired on it, but none of the platforms have every feature. So for example, I couldn't use Remo for that session I mentioned in French because there's no translation options available in that session. There are some other limitations there as well. So yeah, it varies a lot in different platforms. The other thing that's been difficult, so I'm actually organizing an event right now, and the main funders of the event are the German government and the World Bank, both of whom have banned their staff from using Zoom. So we're now kind of exploring how we either use Zoom and create some edits to do that, to allow them in, which is technically possible, or whether we just go to a whole new software. The reason that those big institutions and several other government institutions have banned Zoom is because of the security updates and the security fears that were discussed that you might have heard about before. As I mentioned, they've all been resolved now, but still several institutions have these kind of policies that are still there because of those security worries that were there before. So that's another reason why I might not use Zoom.
Great, we have time for another question or two. If folks want to chime in. I think I've caught everything from the chat, but if not, just jump on and unmute yourself. Great. I am very, very excited about Remo. Can't wait to check it out. That's so much fun. Well, good. And I think there was a question. Oh, great. Janora has one more. Might be planning a 25th high school reunion. Any clever ideas for this type of virtual gathering? That's a great question because we're thinking of doing some class reunions, more class reunions. So we'd love to hear about that.
Great, and thanks Sarah for just dropped in the links to all the platforms. That's really helpful. Maybe we can include them next to the recording somewhere as well, so people can access them. Yeah, I'm still experimenting with the social kind of gatherings. A friend of mine actually organized an event using Remo, coincidentally, a few weeks ago, where she made everyone make a cocktail and send her a picture of the cocktail in order to join the event. That was her price of admission, which I thought was kind of, just a bit of fun. I did a pub quiz last week using a tool called Kahoot. I'll write that in, which was okay. I wouldn't say it was the best tool, but it was fun to just try and do something different, a bit of a quiz. I didn't think they didn't bother with a prize because it's very easy to Google if you're sitting at home and trying to enter a quiz. So we just did that on trust-based. I've been looking at doing trying to do a field trip actually for the other organization we're organizing an event for now. We've been trying to figure out how to do a field trip. I joined an event yesterday where they advertised it as a field trip around the Galapagos, which I was really excited to do. And you can imagine my disappointment when I joined and it was a PowerPoint presentation. So they used the word field trip as kind of a hook to get them in, but it was slides with photos on. So yeah, some of those I think because if you try and have 40 people all in a chat like this, as we mentioned before, people can't chat and do those meaningful conversations. So maybe even if you use Zoom, just using the breakout rooms where people are just randomly put into small rooms. The problem is they can't select on Zoom. You either do it randomly or you preset them. So people can't just select. So you might get some pretty awkward high school reunions of people who maybe don't want to be reunited. I don't know. But you could also do it in a way that was fun as well. Yeah, definitely check out Remo and some of those other platforms as well to do something there. And I think even if you do something like this on Zoom, it's just about trying to be creative with how you moderate it or how you do interventions and let people share it. But I haven't found the secret recipe yet. So if you do have a clever idea that you managed to do, then let me know.
Sandy Shaw, is your hand raised? I think. Is that the case?
Sorry.
Or were you just trying the hand raise?
We're just stretching their arms.
I was just trying to show that I wanted to come up on my screen, but it came up on the other. But I do have, James, how well does music work on these platforms?
Difficult. I've not seen, like, most of the ones that you see that seem like they're pre-recorded on Zoom, I think are engineered or done as a recording and then played. Trying to do music live, it is possible, but I think you'd need a very good internet connection and B, some serious sound engineering behind you to do that well. So I have seen it work, but it's just quite risky. There's a good chance of it glitching and not coming through that well, unfortunately.
And Lily Zay has a question. Lily?
Sorry, I haven't been on Zoom since my classes ended and I couldn't figure out the mute for a second. I wanted to ask about not just Zoom, but virtual fatigue. And after a very lovely hour, I don't want this question to be taken the wrong way, but how do we cope with the pressure to engage online when that can be quite exhausting? I mean, I'm rather relieved that my semester coursework is over, but now it's come take my yoga class online and let's catch up on FaceTime, and how to find the balance, but how to also find engagement when we're asked to spend more time with our screens.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one. And I think what's also difficult is predicting how it's going to change moving forward. Not only how is it now, but as lockdown slowly is reduced and people start to socialize more, how is it going to be, like, how are people going to react socially? And I think that's going to be interesting. On the one hand, people have been forced to do things differently. I think it's been good in a way that people have been forced outside their comfort zone and have started doing things virtually. and realize the benefits. I think right now it's probably too much because you don't really have an option. But I think we're going to end up going back to somewhere where we have a happy medium, where there'll be opportunities to engage online, but you can still go and see your friends at the end of the day in person. So I realize right now, I think everyone feels the same, right? But hopefully there will be a happy medium, because having a gathering like this of people who are part of a community but are all over the world is really powerful. So I wouldn't want this to stop happening. I hope Morehead continues to find ways to do things virtually as well, but that's not going to stop people from also gathering in the foundation. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. In the short term, I think it's just a bit about self-care and taking care of yourself. And you can't attend every single webinar and every single virtual meeting that's happening out there. And that's totally fine too. If you need to go for a walk and stretch, or if you just want to maybe do it in listen mode, so you only have the voice. Like I have some headphones where I can, these are my other headphones that don't require, see them there, that don't require to be plugged in. So they're my Bluetooth headphones. So if there's something that I'm like attending, but maybe not required to be 100% engaged in, I'll maybe wear these and walk around and walk around my room, or do some stretches, or do a bit of cleaning, whatever else I want to, but and half engage. Obviously I turn my camera off because I don't want the people to know that I'm not engaged, but that's just how I deal with it myself sometimes. And if anyone else who's listening in is doing that, don't worry, I won't be offended.
Good advice. Yeah, I think we've all got a little bit of Zoom fatigue now and then. So those are great bits of advice. And as you've teed us up to say that we will be continuing with the speaker series virtually. It was something we were planning to start doing, and my goodness, the timing couldn't have been better. So it worked out really well. Yeah, that's great. I'm not seeing any more questions in the column there, and I just want to thank James again. Oh my goodness, what an incredible opportunity to spend some time with some of our dear friends and learn new ways to approach our virtual gatherings together. Could not be happier with how it all turned out, James.
Thanks everyone. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. It's nice to see familiar faces and new faces. I'm going to drop my email in the chat as well. So if anyone, feel free, if you have any more questions or something else comes up, feel free to shoot me an email as well. But yeah, thank you, Megan and team, for inviting me. I really appreciate it. It's a nice opportunity.